Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Center podcast. I'm Emiliya Zhivotovskaya, your host and founder of the Flourishing Center. We are training the change agents of the world and equipping them with research-based tools for healthy, happy, and successful living. And we're so grateful that you're here.
This is Science Says, where positive psychology and mind-body expert Emiliya Zhivotovskaya will review a recent research study with you and teach you how to put knowledge into action to help you live a flourishing life.
Thanks for listening, and let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Science Says. We are looking at an oldie but a goodie. Well, when I say oldie, it's an article that was published in 2010 in the PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America. And the article is called Speaker-Listener Neural Coupling Underlies Successful Communication. This is a really interesting study and the first of its kind that actually looked at the brain scan of a speaker and then the brain scan of a listener to the same information and looking at how much do their brains align with one another. What they found is that the speaker activity is spatially and temporally located in a similar area as the listener's activity. And so here's how they conducted the study. They brought people into a lab where they were asked to tell a story as if they were speaking the story to a friend. So they were the speakers. Then they recorded this speech along with the brain activity of the person telling it in an unrehearsed real life type of way. And then they played the recording for a listener, and they had to do it in a very specific way that the listener could actually hear the story and not just hear the sound of the MRI machine while they were doing a scan of their brain. And they recorded what brain regions were lighting up when they were receiving the story. And then the listeners afterwards received a questionnaire to assess the level of comprehension that they felt as a listener. What they found was that the brain regions that lit up for the speaker were very similar to the brain regions that were lit up for the listener. They found that areas such as the auditory area, the superior temporal gyrus, the angular gyrus, the temporoparietal junction, areas that are associated with Wernicke's area, which is also known as the listening or being able to hear, and parietal lobe, inferior frontal gyrus, also known as Broca's area, which is responsible for speech, and insula. So these are the various areas of the brain that are typically related to comprehension and linguistic processes. And in addition to that, these brain regions have also been linked to mirror neuron activity. And mirror neurons are the areas of our brain that typically have us mirroring the experiences of other people, enabling us to feel it as though we ourselves are actually experiencing it. So not surprisingly, they found that the listener's brain would interact with the speech in the same way that the speaker's brain would. In many areas, they found a 1 to 3 second time lapse between the area of the brain lighting up in listening than it would in the area of the brain speaking. But then every once in a while, they also found that there was this moment where the speaker's brain would actually light up after the listener's brain region lit up as well. So they found that there was some instances where it was almost as though the listener would have a predictive capacity to predict what the speaker was saying in terms of something they can actually observe in the brain. And so I thought all this was cool, and I thought it was worth noting that the more brain regions that were aligned between the speaker and the listener, the greater the listener reported comprehension of the story as well. And so this does not mean that we should go out and start predicting what people are saying as we are listening to them, but it does give us such an interesting opportunity to just look at how we impact one another and how just the power of sharing stories or words or listening actually impacts our brain and lights up the areas of our brain. I also believe that this is really cool that they were able to do this without any face-to-face contact. But here was a person that was listening actively to the person. So especially if you know that you're going to be kind of tested on the comprehension of the story that you're listening to, you would imagine that a person is more likely to give the story all of their focus. And the fact that they are listening intently, we actually see that their brains are coming into sync with one another, even though the other person's not actually physically in front of them. I think this gives us an opportunity to think about our listening and how we deepen our listening skills, recognizing that when we choose to focus on one another, we're actually synchronizing our brains to one another. And sometimes the synchrony, this understanding of one another, can be so strong that it's almost as though you actually know what the person's going to say ahead of time. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're not trying to think about what the person's going to say ahead of time, because that takes us out of the moment and stops us from just listening to the person. Something that's very, very important for mindfulness and for connection. But if you've ever had that experience where you are just so in alignment with another person, just so in sync that they say something that you were just about to say, or you were thinking about it a second before they said it, well, now research suggests that it could be that your brain regions were actually synchronized with that person so much that maybe they went off around the same time, if not maybe a few seconds sooner. So just some food for thought, sharing some science with you today, hoping that maybe you might use this as an opportunity to attune yourself to another person. See if you can deepen your listening. Really pay attention to what the person is saying. Pay attention to the story that they're telling you, because we know in positive psychology that other people matter. And attune your brain to someone else's so that you can feel that sense of oneness and connection that we so often feel when we are truly connected to one another. Thanks for listening.
Science Says is brought to you by the Flourishing Center Research Vault, where we simplify the science so you can focus on applying it. If you love being in the know with the latest research but have a hard time keeping up, then this program is just for you. In less than 5 minutes per week, you'll learn about 10 new studies in the field of positive psychology and have access to our vault of over 2,000 research summaries. Visit theflourishingcenter.com/research for a free sample of our weekly research digest, and for more information on how to stay in the know, in the science, in a fraction of the time.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I want to encourage you to tell us, what would you love to hear more about? Is there an area of positive psychology you would love to get some more information on in terms of the research? Give us a shout out at info@theflourishingcenter.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a wonderful, flourishing day.